The estate attorney who sold Ellen Marsh the house on Millhaven Road had one unusual condition written into the sale contract, buried in the third addendum on page 11, in language so deliberately ordinary that a person reading quickly would slide right past it. The condition read, "The buyer agrees to maintain the property according to the practices and routines established by the previous occupant." Ellen had laughed when her own attorney pointed it out. She said it sounded like something an eccentric old man had insisted on to make sure someone kept his garden. Her attorney had flagged it, had suggested removing it. Ellen had said, "Leave it in. What harm could it do?" We are going to answer that question. But first, you need to understand what kind of woman Ellen Marsh was, and what kind of life had brought her to a house she had never visited in person, in a county she had never set foot in, sold to her for $43,000 under its appraised value by an estate attorney who answered her very first inquiry email within 7 minutes at 2 in the morning. Before we get to what Ellen found in the walls of that house, and before we get to what was written in the last journal of the man who had lived there for 31 years, and before we get to what the neighbors knew and never said, you should understand one thing about the property at Millhaven Road. The previous owner did not die of natural causes. The county medical examiner said he did, but the county medical examiner had been born in that county, had grown up in that county, and would retire in that county, and there are things that people who have lived their whole lives in a small place learn not to look at directly. Ellen Marsh was 44 years old, recently divorced, and recently relocated from a life in suburban Connecticut that had taken 17 years to build and 14 months to dismantle. She was not a fragile woman. She was the kind of woman who made lists, who handled things, who described herself as practical in the way that people who have survived difficult things sometimes use that word to mean armored. She had one daughter, Nora, 22, living in Boston, and worried about her mother in the way that adult children worry when a parent makes a sudden large decision that cannot quite be explained. Nora had said, on the phone, the week Ellen signed the papers, "Mom, upstate New York, in October, a house you have never been inside. That is not practical, that is the opposite of practical." Ellen had said, "The bones are good. I saw the photos. Sometimes you just know." Nora had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Did the inspector go inside?" And Ellen had said, "Of course." She had not asked the inspector what he thought of it. She had only read the structural report, which said the bones were good. She had not asked what he thought of the smell in the basement, which he had noted in passing in the second-to-last paragraph as musty from age and disuse. She had not followed up when he had written, in the margin of his own copy, which she never saw, a single word that he would later tell no one about. The word was wrong. The house was a 2-story white farmhouse built in 1887, set back from Millhaven Road by a long gravel driveway lined with old maples that had gone deep red and orange in the October cold. It sat on 4 acres of open land with a wood line at the back where the property met the state forest. There was a barn that no longer functioned as a barn, and a root cellar behind the barn that the listing described as a charming historic feature. Ellen arrived on a Friday evening in the last week of October, her SUV loaded with the things she had kept from 17 years of marriage, the things that fit in an SUV when the rest had been divided, and the house had been sold, and the life had been redistributed between 2 people who had once believed they would be together until one of them died. She stood in the driveway in the dying light and looked at the house and felt, for the first time since the divorce proceedings had begun, something she had not expected to feel. She felt that the house was looking back. She told herself it was the light. The way October light at 5 in the afternoon makes everything look as though it is paying close attention. She went inside. The house smelled of something she could not quite name. Not unpleasant, not exactly the musty basement smell of the inspector's report. Something older than that, something like stone left a very long time in standing water. Something organic and mineral and patient. Ellen stood in the front hallway with her keys in her hand and breathed it in and thought, old houses smell like old houses. This is fine. And from somewhere below her, from the direction of the basement, she heard a sound, a low sound, not a mechanical sound, not the house settling in the cold, a sound like something very large, breathing very slowly. Ellen stood still for 11 seconds, which she knew because she was counting without deciding to count, the way you count without thinking, when a part of your mind has decided that timing matters. Then the sound stopped, and Ellen, who was practical, who handled things, who was armored, picked up her first box from the car and carried it inside. Do not go anywhere, because this is only the beginning, and what happens next does not happen all at once. It happens the way cold water rises, 1 degree at a time, until you realize you have been standing in it for a very long time. The first week Ellen spent in the house was almost entirely ordinary. She unpacked. She learned which floorboards creaked, and where the radiators knocked in the night. She found in a kitchen cabinet 7 glass jars of a dark liquid she did not recognize, sealed with wax and labeled in handwriting she could not fully read, 1 word on each lid. She put them in a box in the garage. She found, in the basement, a workbench along the far wall with tools arranged in precise order, and beside the workbench a wooden shelf that held, in perfect sequence, 17 composition notebooks with dates written on their spines in the same handwriting as the jar labels. The most recent notebook's spine read, 2019 to 2023. Thomas Weber, the previous owner, had died in March of 2023. He had been 78 years old and had lived in this house since 1992. He had no known family. The estate had been handled by a firm in Albany. The attorney, a man named Gerald Holt, had answered Ellen's inquiry email at 2 in the morning. Ellen pulled the most recent notebook from the shelf. She opened it to the first page. The first line read, "Whoever reads this was chosen before they ever saw the listing." Ellen closed the notebook. She stood in the basement for a moment, the single bulb above the workbench casting a flat yellow light, the smell of stone and standing water and patience very present in the cold air. Then she put the notebook back on the shelf and went upstairs. She did not sleep well that night, but she told herself it was because the bed was new, and the house was drafty, and she was 44, and recently divorced, and her whole life had recently been reorganized, none of which were small things to carry into sleep. She did not think about the first line of the notebook, or rather, she thought about it in the way you think about something you have decided not to think about, which is to say constantly. Ellen called her daughter Nora on Saturday morning. She said the house was great. She said the light in the kitchen was beautiful in the morning. She said the neighbors had not yet introduced themselves, but the gravel road was quiet and the maples were extraordinary. She did not mention the notebooks. She did not mention what the first one said. Nora said, "Have you met any of the neighbors yet?" Ellen said, "Not yet. There is only one house visible from mine about a quarter mile up the road. Older couple, I think. I have seen lights." Nora said, "You should introduce yourself." "Small towns, Mom. You want people to know you." Ellen thought about that for a moment and then said, Yes, you are right. She walked up to the neighboring house that same afternoon. A white colonial, well-maintained, with a garden that had been put to bed for winter, with the kind of care that shows someone loves it. An older woman answered the door before Ellen had finished knocking, as though she had been watching from inside. Her name was Margaret. She was perhaps 70, sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness in her body that suggests someone who has been very still for a long time. She invited Ellen in for coffee without hesitation. She asked about the move, about where Ellen had come from, about whether she had found the house comfortable. Ellen said, "It is wonderful. A little drafty, but the bones are good." Margaret looked at her for a moment with an expression Ellen could not read, and then said, "Thomas was very particular about the house. He had a way of doing things." Ellen said, "So I hear. There is a clause in my sale contract about maintaining his routines." Margaret set down her coffee cup with a precision that seemed deliberate and said, "Have you found the notebooks yet?" Ellen went very still. She said, "Yes." Margaret said, "Have you read them?" Ellen said, "I opened the most recent one, just the first page." Margaret looked at her for a long time, long enough that it became uncomfortable. And then she said something that Ellen would replay in her mind hundreds of times over the following weeks. She said, "Then you have already made it aware of you." The reading is the introduction. Thomas should have left instructions. If he did not, it is because he knew whoever came next would not have needed them. Ellen said, "I am sorry. What are you telling me?" Margaret picked up her coffee cup again. She said, "Finish the notebook, dear. All of them. In order. Start with the first one. There are things you need to know before the nights get longer." Ellen drove home in a state she would later describe not as fear, but as a very specific kind of clarity. The clarity of someone who has just understood that a situation they believed they were in control of is considerably larger than they knew. She went to the basement. She pulled the first notebook from the shelf. It was dated 1992 to 1993. The first line read, "I was told this would become normal. I am writing this so that whoever comes after me knows that it does not become normal. You only become better at living alongside it." What Thomas Weber had documented across 17 composition notebooks over 31 years was this: the property at Millhaven Road sat above something that Thomas could never name with certainty and referred to throughout the notebooks alternately as the thing below, the arrangement, and in the later years simply as it. It had been there, as far as Thomas could determine from local records and from conversations with Margaret and her late husband over the years, since before the house was built, since before the town was incorporated, since before any European settler had passed through that particular valley. The house had been built by a man named Cornelius Aldridge in 1887, and Cornelius had built it in that specific location, on that specific 4 acres, because the land had been sold to him at a price no one at the time understood. The seller had been anxious to be rid of it. Cornelius had thought himself fortunate. The Aldridge family had lasted 9 years. After the Aldridges, there had been the Caswells, who lasted 11. Then the Pratts, who lasted 4. Then a gap of 22 years when the house stood empty. Then the Monahans, who lasted 16. Then another gap. Then a series of short occupancies that Thomas had noted in a table at the back of the first notebook, none longer than 3 years, all ending in the occupants leaving abruptly, or in deaths that the county medical examiner recorded as natural. Thomas Weber had lasted 31 years. He had lasted 31 years because he had, early on, understood what the arrangement required, and he had maintained it. Every day without exception, For 31 years, he had maintained it. The notebooks described what the arrangement consisted of, in precise and practical detail, written in the tone of a man describing a maintenance schedule for a piece of complicated equipment. Specific actions at specific times, specific offerings placed in specific locations, specific routes walked through the property in a specific order, specific sounds that needed to be made in the basement at specific hours, not worship. Thomas was clear about this. He wrote in the fourth notebook, "This is not worship. I am not devoted to it. I do not believe in it in any religious sense. I maintain it the way one maintains a furnace, because the alternative is what happened to the Aldridges." Ellen read until 3 in the morning. She read the description of what had happened to the Aldridges. She did not sleep at all. Here is the hook, the thing that none of this story has yet made explicit, the thing that Thomas Weber spent 17 notebooks and 31 years understanding, and that Ellen Marsh was beginning to understand in the cold basement of a house she had owned for less than 2 weeks. It did not want anything from the people who lived above it. Not devotion, not blood, not fear, though it produced fear as a side effect, the way a machine produces heat. What it wanted was acknowledgement. It wanted to be known. Every previous occupant who had fled or died had made the same mistake. They had encountered evidence of its presence and responded by pretending it was not real, by rationalizing, by treating the sounds from below as old pipes, and the cold spots as poor insulation, and the shapes at the edge of their vision as tired eyes in an old house. The arrangement Thomas maintained was not a set of rituals to appease a hungry thing. It was a set of practices designed to demonstrate once a day that the person living above it knew it was there. That was all. That was everything. And the people who had not done this, the Aldridges, the Caswells, the Pratts, the Monahans, all the short tenancies in Thomas's table, had not died or fled because the thing below had punished them. They had died or fled because when something very old and very large that has been underground for a very long time becomes convinced that the person living above it cannot or will not perceive it, it begins to make itself more perceptible. And it does not know its own scale. Ellen sat in the basement with the fourth notebook in her hands and understood, with the particular coldness of a person seeing a situation clearly for the first time, that she had been in this house for 10 days, and she had not done a single thing from Thomas's maintenance schedule, because she had not known the maintenance schedule existed, because she had not read the notebooks, because she had put them in the back of her mind on the first night and told herself they could wait. From beneath the floor of the basement, in the deep stone below the foundation, something shifted, not a sound she could have described to anyone. A change in pressure, a change in the weight of the air. A sense of something very large that had been still for a long time beginning, slowly and deliberately, to turn its attention upward. Ellen sat very still with the notebook in her hands and thought, with a clarity she would later describe as the clearest thinking she had ever done. I have been chosen. I have been sold this house by someone who works for it. I have been moved here and allowed to spend 10 days in ignorance, and whatever advantage I might have had from reading the notebooks in the first week is gone. She opened the notebook to the maintenance schedule. Her hands were not steady, but she read it. Ellen called Gerald Holt, the estate attorney, at 7 the following morning. He answered on the second ring, which should not have surprised her by then, but did. She said, "I have read the notebooks. I know what the clause in the contract means. I know what you are." Gerald Holt said nothing for a moment. Then he said, in the tone of a man who has had this conversation before and expected it to arrive sooner, Thomas lasted 31 years. He was exceptional. "We look for exceptional people, Miss Marsh," Ellen said. "You look for desperate people. People who will buy a house without visiting it. People who are recently alone and recently relocated, and who will not have family stopping by to notice something is wrong," Gerald Holt said. "Those qualities overlap significantly with exceptional," Ellen said. "I want out of the contract." Gerald Holt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You have already read the notebooks, Miss Marsh. You understand that by now you are already known to it. You cannot be unknown." "There is no out," Ellen said. "Then what happens if I leave?" Gerald Holt said, "What happened to everyone who left before Thomas? Or you can do what Thomas did. You can read the schedule. You can maintain it. You can live a full life in that house for as long as you are willing to maintain the arrangement, and when your time comes, we will find the next person," Ellen said. "Did Thomas know you were doing this? Did he know how he had been chosen?" Gerald Holt said. "He found out. In the second year. He wrote about it in the notebooks. Ellen already knew this. She had read it. Thomas had written in the second notebook, 'I have understood now how this works. Holt's firm is not a law firm. It is a mechanism for finding new keepers when the old one can no longer serve. They have been doing this since the Aldridge estate was first settled. I am not the first person to have this conversation with whoever Gerald Holt's predecessor was at the time. I will not be the last," he had written. Below that, a single line that Ellen had read 4 times in the basement the previous night. He had written, "The only decision left is whether to stay and maintain, or to go and be found by something that does not understand why you cannot perceive it." Ellen hung up the phone. She stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse on Millhaven Road in the cold morning light, the maples outside the window, stripped of their October color, now the fields gray and still, the wood line at the back of the property dark against a pale sky. From the basement, through the floor, through the bones of the house that were good and old and had been here since 1887, came the slow pressure of something very large paying attention. Ellen went to the basement. She began the maintenance schedule. That was 14 months ago. Ellen Marsh still lives in the house on Millhaven Road. She tends the garden in the spring and summer the way the previous occupant did. She keeps the schedule Thomas documented. She has read all 17 notebooks and has begun an 18th. She calls Nora every Sunday. She says the house is wonderful. She says the light in the kitchen is beautiful in the morning. She says she has made friends with the older woman up the road, which is true. Margaret visits twice a week, and they drink coffee and do not discuss the thing below because there is nothing useful to discuss about it. Nora visited once in the summer. She said the house was beautiful. She said her mother seemed well, which was not quite the same as saying her mother seemed happy, but close enough. She noticed that her mother had a habit of pausing once or twice a day wherever she was in the house and making a sound that Nora could not fully describe. Not a word, not a prayer. Something low and deliberate in the back of the throat, held for a count of 3, then released. Nora asked about it. Ellen said, "Old houses have their requirements. You learn them." Nora did not ask again. She will not visit again for some time. She is busy. She is 22. She is building her own life in Boston, and the house is a long drive, and her mother seems well, and the timing never quite works out. Ellen is aware of this. She believes the house is aware of it too. She believes the house prefers it. What Ellen did not tell her daughter, and what she has not told anyone, is what she found in the root cellar behind the barn in the first week of November, the month after she moved in. When the schedule required her to inspect and maintain the root cellar, at the autumn transition, there is something in the root cellar. Not the thing below. Not the arrangement itself. Something else. Something that Thomas had built in the root cellar over 31 years. Something that Ellen is still in the process of understanding. It is a record, every keeper's name, carved into the stone wall, going back further than the Aldridges, further than the house. Names in languages Ellen has looked up and found to be languages that have not been spoken for centuries. There are 47 names carved into that wall. Thomas's name is 47, Ellen's is 48. Carved in stone, she did not put there. In handwriting that is not hers and not Thomas's and not anyone whose hands she has ever seen. She stood in the root cellar the day she found it, in the cold November light, and looked at her own name carved in rock, and understood with complete finality what Thomas Weber had understood in his second year, and had spent the next 29 trying to accept. She was never choosing to stay. She had been placed, the way a name is placed in a ledger, the way a caretaker is assigned to a property, the way something very old and very patient marks down what it considers its own. Ellen drove to Margaret's house that evening and sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, "How long have you known?" Margaret said, "My whole life. My mother knew. Her mother knew. We are not keepers. We are the ones who help keepers understand," Ellen said. "Is there anything in this I get to choose?" Margaret looked at her for a long time with those sharp eyes and that still body and said, very gently, very honestly, "Yes, you get to choose how you keep it." Thomas kept it with discipline. Some have kept it with hatred, some with fear, a few, very few, with something closer to understanding. She paused, she said, "Thomas told me once, in his last year, that he had come to understand it the way you come to understand weather. Something large and old and without malice, that simply is what it is, that does not care whether you flourish or suffer as long as you are present." He said that in the end, that had become enough to live with, Ellen said. "And for you, is it enough to live beside?" Margaret said, "I have lived beside it my whole life. My mother and her mother did the same. Some things you are born into, some things you walk into with your eyes open. The size of the thing does not change which of those it is for you." Ellen drove home. She went down to the basement. She did the evening portion of the maintenance schedule from beneath the floor in the deep old stone. The pressure that was not a sound and not a feeling, but something between the two, acknowledged her presence in the way it had acknowledged Thomas Weber's presence. Every evening, for 31 years, it knew she was there. Ellen turned off the basement light and went upstairs to bed, from somewhere deep below the foundation, deep below the stone, deep below whatever it is that things like this are made of. Something that had been in this valley since before anyone gave this valley a name, settled back into its patience, knowing that tomorrow and the day after, and for as many days as the new keeper could manage, the acknowledgement would come again. It always did. It always would. As long as someone was living above it who understood the arrangement. And now someone was.